Hello, everyone. Have you ever wondered what open source is like within the humanitarian social sector? Hi, and welcome to another episode on Open Source Diaries, where we listen to open source stories and discuss the endless possibilities of open source across different fields and sectors. And today we have an amazing speaker who happens to be an open source specialist that works with open source innovation office at UNICEF. And Vipul is going to be offloading all the amazing work he has done from how he moved from Fedora to other open source communities and how he got here today. And so just stay tuned. But great to have you here, Vipul.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. So first off, I was really excited when I came across your profile because I think this is an area that I personally have been wanting to get more details in. So I'm going to be taking a lot of points down. But before we do that, do you mind sharing a bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Vipul, as you mentioned. I come from platform-specific communities, and I'm a product of community. I often hear a lot of people saying this, which is a really good thing, and that's the beauty about open source as well. About 10 years ago, I started using and looking back, contributing small amounts of bug fixes, reports, and edits in Fedora project. And then from there, I got internship in that in QA team, and then I got into development side of things, and then I started maintaining some packages, doing sysadmin stuff, infrastructure. So I come from very much a platform specific thing, be it containers, be it OpenShift Kubernetes kind of things, or Linux operating system as a platform, right? About 4 or 5 years in my career as software engineer, I realized I was a mediocre engineer at best, or I lost interest midpoint. I used to be decent, but then I lost interest, and you can't be great at something if you lost interest, at least not me. So I decided, okay, what do I actually value a lot? And over time, I realized it was community, it was people, it was working with technical people and seeing how I can help them or support them. So I started doing all of those other things. I was in council for DEI advisor. I led mentorship projects in Fedora project and a bunch of things here and there. So I wore many hats. And then I realized HFOS or humanitarian FOS is something that exists. Coming from very rural background in India, I could relate a lot to the needs of such places where digital divide still exists. And I started looking into what more can I do. I ran into a few friends who were working in this ecosystem, saw certain opportunities, tried it, and joined UNICEF as a consultant. And my role used to be mentoring individual different companies who are open source and they are trying to make a business, sustainable business around their open source product. And how can I help them make their open source product better? And that can be in terms of just figuring out some sort of business capacity, but also how do you make the software itself more relevant? CI/CD, documentation, governance. What does a good open source project looks like, which is beyond just a license slapped on an open source repository, right?
Yeah.
Or a public repository. So it was a lot of learning on the job, figuring out what works best, the projects that I have worked with, seeing what were there and how can we map it to this very small new projects. And now I do strategy, policy. I recently co-authored a policy for UN as part of the overall UN open source community of practice. Recently, open source principles are catching a lot of drift now. So we recently wrote that as part of the policy as well, which was super fun, and trying to make governments, IGOs, NGOs be part of this open source movements. We often talk in terms of waves of open source. So first was the hacker movement, the developers, the enthusiasts who are doing it in their free time. Second was businesses after OSI's launch, and a lot of work went into it to make businesses agree with open source philosophy, understand that it doesn't mean no money. And now we are seeing more and more national level policies and capacity buildings effort to make open source more sustainable, but also them producing those software as open source. And I'm very much involved in that field. We're trying to move IGOs and governments to do more open source. And that can be in terms of working with governments to do national level open source policies, or at IGO level trying to influence certain things on how do we make sure open source and DPG are core of whenever we are talking about future. Happy to talk about all of these things, but that's one side of Vipul. The second side of Vipul is this coffee background where I always you'll find me a very good cup of coffee in my hand. So always happy to talk about coffee, open source, or a bunch of other things that my ADHD rabbit holes take me into.
Okay. So you have said a lot of exciting things, and from the UN to the work that you're doing with UNICEF, and then like to the policies. And looking at it, right, I know that this is like really, really different from the software background that you started off with. And I'm wondering what actually led to moving to this aspect of humanitarian social projects, and then like the policy aspect of things. What foundation did you get that made you dive into this aspect as well?
Well, I didn't start as this. It's something that I had to learn on the job because I realized it was necessity. I started as a technologist who would work with open source project, and a friend from open source ecosystem used to call him public interest technologist. And that was a really cool thing to hear that, okay, there are people who are working on technology for public interest.
Well,
So I was able to map that and see, okay, that's something I do want to grow into. Even when I was doing open source mentorship for companies, for startups as part of UNICEF Venture Fund, I was more technical than thinking about overall strategy and business element of it. Those things I had to learn. And now I'm a big believer of sustainability of open source projects beyond just goodwill and community and donations and grants. So how do we make open source system sustainable, an ecosystem, right? But policy things, I realize if you have to make a movement or make an impact, lasting impact, individually, we can do, again, great things, but at limited capacity. And when governments and when IGOs or bigger players get into the picture, there can be a massive adoption. And we saw how government like Germany, with their different bills and sovereign tech fund, are making a huge amount of impact on open source elements. French government is very pro open source, doing a bunch of things, and so are many other governments as well. So for me, policy came as a necessity to be able to drive these for lasting impact. I can take a project, I can ask someone to we should deploy this, but then it does not come with any guarantee or internal culture change. So it's something that I'm still learning, it's something that I'm still working on. My technologist background, being at UNICEF, where software is nothing more than just a mean to do something. I always say this, UNICEF started before first traditional software was made.
sure.
First software, as we see it in Computer Stored Executable Program, 1948, UNICEF 1946. So you go to UNICEF, people who have to work on saving children's life, it does not matter what type of software you're using. Right? The goal is always to save a child's life, and it should be. So how do you change a culture to try to showcase that when we do certain way, it can be a very effective mean to save cost, it can build trust with community, and over time we don't have to reduplicate our efforts back and back. So there are challenges, and policy can be a good way to highlight that as an organization this is something we care about.
Interesting.
So long answer, but in short, learning on the job.
All right. So now let's come down to the reason why we're here. What is the relationship between UN, UNICEF, and like these NGOs that you're working with, right? And open.
Yeah.
Because like when I think about it, they're like two different things. We're talking about saving children, we're talking about helping underrepresented communities, and then there's like open source, the software aspect of it. What's the relationship?
Yes, I think like for a few years I have been saying this, and it's kind of a same beating the old drum. Traditionally, in any government or NGOs, what we see is there is a project manager or there is someone who has taken a new initiative. They'll hire a vendor because most of the time
Mm-hmm.
we don't have internal capacity or development team to build these things.
Yeah.
Some have, most don't. You hire a vendor to develop a solution to do something specific, and then when that task is done, no one looks back at it. What happens if another government has to implement the same situation, same problem, or next person come and they have to redo it? They realize that the software stack is far outdated or if not even accessible. People don't even know that we had something like this.
Sure.
So when we talk about making an impact, the one that often we talk about is cost saving. But now, coming from UN Open Source Week, I'm very glad to inform that now the conversation has moved beyond just the cost saving element. Now we are talking about sovereignty. Now we are talking about how when you deploy a solution in a country scale, how do you own the data? How do you work with governments to make sure that certain data remains anonymous even with governments? Let's say refugee data, or if you're working in a conflict state, how do we make sure that data flow with certain kind of privacy elements? And how do you build that trust with community because they're giving their very core element of it? Data, as we say, like uranium, data is the new uranium, not oil. New things that I'm hearing a lot. So it's about trust, it's about transparency, it's about having that full capacity of control of how every single element of it is flowing into it. How am I deploying my sovereign cloud? And again, sovereignty is not about isolation. It's about the capacity of individuals to do what they want with it.
Yeah.
We are talking about digital public good. We want to think about when I want to make an impact in Syria, I can also take it to Iran, I can also take it to Sudan, and I do not have to worry about where does this software come from and is it sanctioned in that state. Right? So how do we truly use this borderless technology to make impact everywhere, reach the unreachables? And that's where open source is such a big player. Recently, we also see that in trade wars. Uh, few months ago, we heard a lot of talking about different kind of trade percentage exports questions. Can IP, which is an intellectual property and open source deals with copyright intellectual property, can that have certain impact on it? So how do we deal around that? Open source is a great answer for all of these things, allowing sovereignty of individual member state or countries. So it's core of it.
Okay. First off, I'm really, really happy that I got to hear this firsthand because I I'd have never thought about it from that point of view. And thank you for explaining that, by the way. And so, what ways does the UNICEF and UN and most of these NGOs leverage open source to promote digital inclusion and building of like local capacity within various regions?
Many different ways and many different capacities as well. There are so many different angles and elements we approach it with. One would be 97% or something of all software is open source. So one very easy that we build, any software that you build is impossible to build without open source today. And software, we talk about digital transformation. We see banking systems becoming digital. We talk about identity platforms, and we talk about DPI, digital public infrastructure stack, being digital everything. More and more countries, more and more people are moving their lives to digital infrastructure. And as my friend Stephen Jacobs says, um, technology or digital infrastructure is now people and human infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is so much of open source in all of this digital infrastructure, it becomes critical human infrastructure. So open source is core of driving everything. How do we leverage it? We leverage it by working with community. So think about, and again, I'm talking about open source as a movement beyond just the source code element of it. Whenever there's a disaster that happens and we need disaster mapping, it's about community getting together, doing survey, doing mapping, understanding and leveraging what's the damage. How do we fix it? It's about transparency. When we do certain research, it's about sharing it so we don't capitalize on any good just by ourselves. Being able to leverage different advancements that are happening in open source ecosystem, all of it comes up as the leveraging open source as well. And we are participating in at very different levels. At UNICEF Office of Innovation, we have a venture fund. And where we do is we wanted to tackle the challenge of sustaining HFOS or humanitarian solutions beyond grants, the first problem that I mentioned.
Yeah.
We fund for-profit open source solutions. So we fund companies. We don't take any equity from it. What we ask is that you be open source. So that's our way. If they're aligning with our mission, traditionally, if you look at how any funding flows, most of the funding goes to one specific area of one specific country. So many goes to, I feel like the number is absurd. 90% goes to male or men-led companies. Also, most of the funding goes to Silicon Valley, for example. We are trying to bridge that gap as well. We are funding open source for-profit companies from UNICEF program countries. So that can be African countries, that can be Southern Indian countries like India is one of them, Southern American companies, I'm saying companies, Southern American countries, UNICEF program countries. And if they align with our mission, if they have open source solution, and if they are for profit, we fund them to do a pilot or scale their solution. And we want to see them sustained. That's one of our approach of seeing one sustaining solution, sustaining open source solution, but also those solutions who make a lasting impact while having a business so they don't have to rely on NGOs and grants for it.
So do these projects that are being funded have to come from like a specific country before the funding is being allocated to before they can get the support?
So the way it works is we have certain amount of pool of funding we want to provide.
Yeah.
And we do a call for interest where companies from that countries can apply. So the company has to be registered in those program countries. So we don't have money allocated to specific countries, but we have money allocated to UNICEF program countries. And we want to fund businesses from that. So I do a call for interest on, we recently had a femtech call where we see there is a big, massive gap in female focused technologies
Yeah.
on how can it make life better for mothers or better for women. And we opened it and we got, I think, around 1,200 companies applying to us.
Wow.
And they are from all over the world, all over the place. So the first filtration is, are you from UNICEF program countries, right? Because we don't want to fund companies from US. Few reasons. One, our focus should not be there. There are many funds available. The opportunity and the access to that kind of funding or growth is available there. So that's not our priority area right now. Or that's not our UNICEF's priority area. We don't work I live in Stockholm, so we don't really work in Stockholm to do things for Swedish children because the infrastructure and the opportunity here is well established. So if they're from UNICEF program countries, we see if the companies are registered in those countries, and then we also see the teams. How equitable is the team? Then we go through the solutions of it. And if they all map, they go through different rounds of clearance, and then we fund them.
That makes a lot of sense. So aside like these funding, like these grants that are available for profits for like NGOs and profit based projects, right?
Only for profit. These are not for NGOs because we want to focus on that sustainability element of it. UNICEF works with many different NGOs. On ground, different places. But UNICEF Venture Fund, the program I'm talking about, so far we have funded about 174 companies in 78 countries. We only fund for-profit registered companies, but only open source solutions.
All right. So aside these funding programs that supports these projects, are there other like efforts that have been brought up from either UNICEF or the UN specifically to like engage local communities, let's say the youth? I know you mentioned the Fem Code program, which is really awesome. And I got to read about it a bit and I shared it with a couple of persons as well. But like, are there other programs that are tailored towards like informing or educating people around some of these policies that the UN is trying to drive?
So you mean the UNICEF Venture Fund specifically or overall?
Yeah, like the UNICEF innovation team. Are there like other aspects, other efforts that are put towards educating or creating awareness on the mission that the team is working with, bringing open source, bringing the intersect of open source, and then like the development areas that need this help and all of that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'll name a couple that I'm working on, which is very exciting. So earlier I mentioned I'm working with some governments on their open source national capacities. So I'll give one example of Sierra Leone, where one of the things that we are trying to work on is working with government to set national level policy of Sierra Leone government is also a very forward thinking, tech focused government, and they have really great insights and foresights around these things. They were a founding member of Digital Public Good Alliance. And they are incredibly interested in having an open source national level policy. But policy is just one element of it. If you have policy without the capacity building, it's bound to fail. So what we have been doing is we are working with university to do curriculums around open source and digital public goods. We also have set a community of practice on ground with many different students participating and learning from each other. There is a platform in progress right now. It was announced at the Innovation Summit earlier this month, actually. Which is a place where any business or anyone can go and highlight a project that this project wishes to be a digital public good. There are community and people around it who can map the difference, or who can map the delta of what needs to be done for it to be eligible to become a digital public good. And there can be a contribution to that. So also local community of contributing model. And there are bounty platforms around it where people can make money. So that acts as an incentive model for people to get better in tech. And once you are better in technology or contributing to open source, obviously all of it is public info. And that can help you leverage global opportunities for open source or general software related thing as well. So it all maps down to capacity building and job creation, future planning of this. But that's capacity building side of things. Then there is a community of, so university, community, and then at the same time, government very interested in doing policy and adopting open source solution, highlighting and making all the internally developed solution open source as well. So super cool people at government who are really excited and looking forward to doing this task. We have been working with Kazakhstan, with KBTU, which is university there, to launch such elective courses on open source and DPG for master's and bachelor students who can take it and learn and get credits for it. And all of these can help them get jobs as well. So we always think about not just capacity building, but also how does it map to their future? Let's be honest, you can't make the world better if you have bills to pay. So how do we make sure that all of these different elements are covered? We go to different conferences, to talk about our efforts, we go to actually in the Global Digital Compact. So last year, all country leaders met together and adopted a pact for the future, and Global Digital Compact is part of it. It's a framework for closing the digital divide, and open source and DPG are part of that. So all countries together agreeing on how these things can make an impact, how open source and DPG are core of making impact in digital transformation. UNICEF has been doing a lot of efforts in advocating for these things. So yes, we are doing work with students, we are doing capacity building and trainings and programs, but also we are working with governments to do the same thing there. And we are trying to advocate for in global stages of how do we make sure that the world remains equitable at the digital capacity, or moving forward, we try to close that divide.
That is actually really fascinating. And the reason I'm excited to hear about this is I think last week I was in a conversation with a couple of friends, and one of the things that I pointed out is I have had conversations with most persons that have like years of experience with open source. And one thing that every single one of them points out is they learned about open source from their university, and they were able to like work on Unix and most of like the early OS systems, right? And I see that from most universities in Africa, for instance, most universities from this part of the world do not actually talk about open source enough. And so when students come out from the universities, they're figuring out from the start what open source is, or what Unix or Linux is. And these are like things that so many other persons had the advantage to learn from schools. So it's really interesting. And I'm wondering if it's possible to apply for more universities that should participate in this.
Absolutely right. And we want to make this curriculum that we are developing open source and digital public good as well, because we want more universities to adopt it, and we want more. The end goal for this, actually, I have an amazing colleague, Chris, who is really passionate about these things, who is thinking about including youth beyond just the open source element, but actually providing them a seat at the table for future conversations. And because open source and DPG are core part of it, he also leads the DPG team at Office of Innovation. I hope he doesn't mind, but I'm quoting one of his plans is to have a sovereignty focused master's program where children and students can learn about things beyond just how to contribute. But I relate to you because when I was in university, I didn't know of Google Summer of Code. I didn't know of outreachy programs. I learned of these things when I started doing internship at Red Hat by contributing, somehow figuring it out. And there I realized, oh, I could have done this internship. That's pretty cool. But I was already mentoring a project by that time. So I got to know about this thing slightly late. So how do we make sure that moving forward, more and more people are aware of this opportunity? And in university, at least from Indian background, it's all about job. It's all about stability. It's all about money. And I think major part of African countries can also relate to that, because we got the way we are set up, we need to work for something. So how do we create that incentive mechanism for students to get interested in and then contribute? So highlighting these initiatives is super important.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for sharing more light on that. And how do you like collaborate with wider open source communities? And I heard you mention something about like the digital public goods and so many other projects. But aside this, how do you engage with like maintainers, contributors, designers, and other people within open source communities that are building some of these projects?
Not well, right? That's one of the things. We have been leading in advocacy. We have been leading in consuming and trying to do things. We use many humanitarian solutions to make impact. But in terms of going back and contributing, because our mission is so focused on getting something done and making that impact, there will be teams. There are many teams within UNICEF because it's so large that it's hard to keep track of. But is there a very clear example of how we interact with upstream projects? We lack that. And that's something as part of, if you go back to UN open source principles, contribute back is one of the core elements of it. We want to work with upstream community in highlighting their efforts, because that can also go a long way in marketing and advocacy, right? So we do want to see, we notice a gap in being able to work together with the upstream open source community, and there are efforts we are doing internally. I don't want to name smaller things that we are doing, but there is a gap. I accept that, yeah. And we're working on it. That's the beauty of it.
Amazing. So now that we're talking about like other contributions and collaborations, right? How would a typical contribution, open source contribution, look like within a community like the open source innovation team, or like the UNICEF or UN? Are there areas that people should look out for? What form of contributions should they bring in as their method of like giving back to the community?
So there are many, many projects that we have worked on. Some incredibly well known are Rapid Pro, Primero. We also have Hope. So these are different kind of platforms and solutions that we use. So Primero is a child focused child protection case management solution.
Yeah.
Hope is a cash disbursement program. Rapid Pro is a way how governments can inform and interact with mass audience. So let's say there's a disaster that happening and you want to notify everyone. And there are many such solutions. At UNICEF Venture Fund, we fund these companies. And individually, these are projects. And project's contribution model remains the same. Now, how well is the project structured to receive contribution? Because as you would know, Anita, to get contribution, you need to set your own house in order first. You need to have good contribution guidelines. You need to have good inflow structure. You need to have good help places, good documentation, ticket templates, having enough public roadmaps so community can go and engage. So there is a challenge where we are working on filling that gap, where we have easy pipeline into contribution model, but we have many. So if you go on UNICEF Venture Fund's website, you'll see a bunch of companies where you can see all the projects that we especially love and we want to highlight about contribution, because these are solutions that we see real value in. And these are solutions that we want to see sustain beyond just in an individual company. And when I say sustain, I mean technologically sustain. So they're technologically relevant 5 years later because they're receiving that needed update to get the work done in a secure, non-vulnerable manner. We have, if you go to Primero or Rapid Pro, these are very mature projects. If you go on UNICEF's GitHub, you would also see some projects which are more high traffic, which a lot of work is happening. But I do want to acknowledge, are these projects always set to receive contribution? Is a challenge. Internally, we are also working a group of 5 solutions that make end-to-end solutions for, let's say, disaster happens or flood happens in a country. How do we use parametric insurance, automatic trigger to send insurance money to farmers so they can use that immediately? And that requires many different things: cash disbursement, there's parametric insurance element of it, understanding smart contracts to auto release funds, having a DAO initiative around it perhaps. And we are trying to have packages of such solutions. And very soon I'll share the link with you so you can share with your audience later on. But the main goal is having a place where you go and you see end-to-end impact solution and you can go and contribute to the element you like. We are working on this packaging solution for UNICEF Venture Fund. This is from the companies we have invested in. These are open source solutions. We are trying to work with them on their sustainability model, and contributions are always welcome to those.
Okay. Thank you for pointing all of these projects. So, how can external contributors, right, also get involved? Persons who are interested in some of this project that you've listed, right? How can they contribute, either from independent developers to designers? How can they also like get involved with this project?
So it remains similar to any open source project. I would say before you pick a project, go and evaluate the project in a few things. How well structured is it to receive contribution? It goes back to UNICEF being so large, and there are so many different teams working in different modality. We often work with vendors who develop things for us.
Yeah.
So not all projects are also set to receive contribution, because we needed something for critical and we want to work, open source archetypes, and there is a rocket ship to Mars where you just want to get something done and your focus is just on that. You don't want to contribute to those kind of projects. Even if I like those projects, we don't want to contribute to that as individuals, because we want to make sure that there is enough capacity for us to take our time and contribute back. I would say, look at the repository, look at GitHub, look at different kind of work plan that or blogs that we share of what work is going on. Explore it. Does it have public tickets? Do they have contribution guidelines? Does it have well structured, perhaps even code of conduct? Because that's the value alignment, right? If they have it, then just same structure of any open source contribution. Make sure you let them know that you are interested in working in it, have that ticket assigned to you, and follow the contribution guidelines and do those tasks. There is a project called Bebo, which is a parenting app, which I absolutely love. It is structured where you can go and contribute to it. There are people who are on the other side of maintenance who are going to review your pull request and accept it. Maintenance is always tricky. How many maintainers are on the other side to receive those contribution can be a tricky thing to figure out. But that's where evaluate the repositories and you should find your answer there.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for sharing that. And now, for those that are watching this, right, and had intentions of one day or dreams of one day, because I think growing up, that was one of my goals and dreams to contribute to UNICEF. And And I was really excited about it. And I know so many other persons watching this share that same goal. So for those that want to do this but do not know how to get started, right? Because I know we just found out now that there's an intersect between both open source and social projects like this. So what advice would you give to these people that have interest in contributing to projects that are focused on social good, like the UN, UNICEF, and so many other digital public good projects?
I would definitely highlight digital public good. So, digital public good is an initiative by many different organizations. It comes out of Secretary General's very high level panel talking about future and how software, open data, open content, all of this can have massive impact in attaining software sustainable development goal,
Yeah.
not the SDG, right? So DPGs are open source software, content, data, AI models, and the whole AI system who are built with do no harm design. And they help attain one of the sustainable development goals in one way or another. So if you go on the DPGA website, stillpublicgoods.net, you will see a registry, which are a list of projects which are reviewed against the 9 indicators of DPG standard. And Digital Public Good has a standard. It talks about uh, licensing, clear ownership, good documentation built on best practices. It talks about that wherever the solution is deployed, it's following the local regulations on data protection. So it has this very detailed standard on different standard for content, different standard for software. Same goes for AI systems.
Yeah.
One, I would say, when you're building your solution, think of the DPG standard. It's not about making your solution DPG or nominating and having it registered, which is always a great thing. But whenever you are building a solution, thinking in terms of what sustainable development goal is it going to help is a great framework to decide the social cause of your solution. Be it education, be it hunger related, or be it pollution related, any of these things. Thinking about what impact your solution is going to have. I love SDG because it's a great framework to think about that. And DPG is very relevant in all things digital. Having a component of do no harm, having the open source element of it, which is openly licensed, and something that help you attain SDG, that solutions is very relevant to almost all IGOs, NGOs, governments. So build that. If you're not building that, go explore those DPGs, see what solutions that do you align with. Perhaps there are solutions that you're using or is deployed in your country. We talk about DHIS2, which is in so many countries on the health side of things. We talk about MOSIP, which is an identity solution. Different countries are using that as identity platform for all their citizens. Perhaps you are using something like this. Do you want to go back and contribute that? These are good things to think about because you are working closely to the solution that making impact on millions and billions of lives. So think from when developing DPG standard, thinking about SDG framework whenever you are interacting with the solutions, and going and exploring solutions that are relevant to this is always a good way to contribute.
So, all right. Thank you so much for sharing that. And are there like any skills that people need to have prior aside knowing more about this project? Just to top it off.
Well, open source requires all kind of skills, and you know this, right? We need developers, we need document writers, we need designers, we need people to project manage, we need people to just help us structure thoughts. All of them are equally important. From a typo to a feature change, all contributions should be welcomed in open source, and we do need that. So skills, yeah, you can grow skills, but I would say go approach a project, see the value alignment. If you think this is a good project for you, skills can be acquired. But also there's an element of mapping your skill to the requirement of the project because you do not want the learning curve too much.
Yeah.
So think of what skills you have. Think about how much time you want to contribute and just start with that. If I want to suddenly go and contribute to a C++ core audio library project, it's going to take me a lot of time before I can make any impact.
Yeah.
Is my time more useful in other element? So I would ask you, what are your skills? What kind of contributions would you like to make? Because if you do not like that task, you're going to lose interest. How I lost interest from writing source code. And when you lose interest, you can't sustain that. Remember, you are going to give your valuable time to a project. Whatever good cause it is, it's your time. And your time, so value alignment is equally important, and you should be interested in it. Because without interest, it's not sustainable. So skills can be grown. Figure out if you're interested in it or not.
Okay. All right. I really appreciate this conversation. It's been so enlightening. Do you have any final words to give to our audience and those that are watching this video?
So you keep changing world one sip at a time. Enjoy a good coffee, but people first.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, people. I have learned so much, and I'm sure you have too. If you want to learn more about the work that Vipul is doing at Open Source Innovators team, you can also check out his profiles on social. And also, is it okay to reach out to you?
Absolutely. I love that. People have, just to highlight, sorry to take a couple more minutes. As I highlighted, product of community, I have been on the receiving end of kindness of open source ecosystem for a very long time. I had many heroes in open source ecosystem, and nothing makes me feel better about myself than helping someone else. So you'll be doing me a favor if you reach out to ask questions.
So don't forget to hit up Vipul if you have any other questions regarding contributing to a community like a project like the UNICEF. And if you want to learn more about other open source projects or other ways that you can contribute to open source in general, or how open source intersects with like other sectors, you know this is your channel and this is the best place to get context on that. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe, and also share with your friends who would find this really helpful.